When you're thinking about middle school and high school, students are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act and by individuals and under IDEA, which covers students that may have a potential disability. It's important to remember, especially when you're talking about this kind of topic, is that a 504 and an IEP are very different. All students that have PI are covered under a 504. They have a medical condition that makes participation in school not as easy as their peers. And so the school has to provide some form of accommodations. If a PI becomes so impactful that it starts to have it starts to create academic issues, then an IEP is something that can be looked at, because the condition itself may actually be causing your student to struggle in school and result in what they would call an identifiable disability. Some of the accommodations that we used as parents with our own son, and these are really easy to do. I've done a lot of these as an assistant principal doing 504s in my own building. Hot passes, no explanation to the teacher. Hot pass lets you get to the bathroom, to get to the nurse. It's one of those things where they display it and the teacher sends them on their way. Extra time on tests, note takers, sets of books for home. In my son's school district, they were going to ask the student to carry this massive load of books with them everywhere they went. We're like, that's just not going to work out really well. He needs to have a set of books in class that he has access to. Those are his books. No one else gets to touch it. And then there's a set of books that come home and he gets to keep those at home, so he's not carting them back and forth. College is a very different experience when it comes to getting your child ready for that time in their lives. The college choice of your child, they're going to deal directly with them unless they give permission to actually talk to you. Great example. We at the university my son had chosen to go to, they had a housing requirement as a freshman. You must live on campus. Our doctor said he must not live on campus. And so what they really wanted to do was try to strong arm my son into the fact that, oh, you're going to live on campus, until he basically handed the phone to my wife and said, Mom, you need to talk to these people. And at that point, then things changed some. But without permission from your child, you have no access whatsoever to really talk to the college. They're going, your child's an adult, and we're going to work with them as adults. Colleges do not honor 504s and IEPs in the way they're written in school. They cannot change the curriculum in any way, shape, or form in college. There are things, though, that you need to be aware of when you go to college. In the first place, you need to look, as you guys are taking tours, where's the school's Disability Resource Center? They are the ones that provide the academic supports that are available, and they vary really from school to school. My son had a few accommodations at the university he attended. He didn't need the academic help, but there were a few things that he accessed that through the Disability Resource Center that he would not have been able to otherwise had he not known that it existed and where to go. Now, depending on the school and university, a lot of them are moving away from that test of SAT or ACT as a college admission requirement, but still, by and large, they're required. Now, accommodations can be given on those tests, but we need to understand that you have to work through your school in order to make sure that you can actually have an accommodation on the SAT or the ACT, and then it does take time. So if you think that potentially your child's going to have some help or have some accommodations on the SAT, those are the things that you actually connect with your child's school counselor, and the school counselor will have to follow up and make those requests of the college board or whatever company's actually in charge of those assessments. I know that it's not simple and easy. And again, when you're talking to the counselor's not going to have any idea. They're not going to understand why your child will need these accommodations. So it's that over communication with them to get them to understand, here's the situation of your student. Here's why it's important to have the accommodations, and then make sure you continue to follow up. Some of the things they can do, that extended time period is really, really important. Breaks especially, I don't know about how a lot of your children were, but for my son, it was like he could go for a couple of hours and then really needed to take just time to stretch, time to use the restroom, just a chance to get a drink of water, something just to reset and refocus. Large print reading, and of course, accommodations for Braille if you have a student that is blind. The resources that are available, what your middle schooler has is going to be passed on to the high school. Now, in my district, we are what is considered an elementary district. So if you're in California and you're in a state that has separate school districts where K through 8 is one district and then you have another school district, it's a little more difficult. If you're in a unified school district, kind of the same, still kind of not as difficult, but your middle school at least is doing the same thing your high school is because you're kind of under the same governance. In the case of mine, we had to have a completely brand new, here's what we're going to have to do to teach the next school district about our son. And that may happen if you're in that kind of situation. It was really easy from elementary to middle school. He was already in my school district. It was pretty simple to go from 6th grade on to 7th grade and have those discussions. Our director of student services and director of health services already knew him. And so that was kind of an easy, simple thing to do. That's the other person that you really need to become familiar with when you think about resources in your school district. Who's the person that really takes care of health services? Who's the person that understands school nursing inside of every school building? For my school district, we have someone who specifically does that job. She's a director of health services. In some school districts, that may not be the case. If it's smaller, it's likely going to be the director of special education or the director of student services that will be that kind of person. But if you communicate through them and always have them have their phone number available, they're a good resource, especially as you're transitioning from a middle school to a high school. You have to be prepared to advocate all over again. Even maybe within your own school district, you get comfortable with a group, they get who you are, you're there for a couple of years, you change schools, and now you're dealing with a completely different group of people. And your advocacy and your educator have to come out of you all over again, because you're going to have to educate a brand new staff, a brand new administration. And of course, they're not going to understand exactly why, what, or how. And that's when, if things don't go the way they're supposed to, you become that advocate all over again. And as much as I hate to say that I wish schools were different, the squeaky wheel does get greased when it comes to school districts. And so sometimes you have to be, okay, we've emailed, we've talked, now I have to set a meeting and talk to you in person about it. Some of the really great resources that we used, we passed on a school guide to every school my son ever attended. The IDF puts out a fantastic school guide. We hand that off. We make sure that every school has it and they understand, especially the school nurses. And of course, the Bill of Rights for patients with PI is also really important. As you sit down and think, here's a conversation that we're going to have. If the more knowledge you have on what rights your student has that are covered under IDEA and covered under ADA, that really, really is important, because then you're starting to talk the language of the administrators you're sitting with. Take a lot of college tours. That's the one thing. If college is in the books and it's getting close, know the place your child's choosing to call home for the next 4 years. For us, as soon as my son said, I want to attend the University of Nevada, Las Vegas as a high school freshman, we took the tour. And he had thought about a few different places over the course of just where he was in high school, and we took a tour of those schools too. He eventually decided that he was going to stick with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, but we were comfortable. We toured that school 3 or 4 separate times over the course of his high school career, just so we were comfortable after he made a decision to know what's there, what resources are available, how is that going to look in his future, how are they going to support him if something were to happen, if he were to have any kind of medical issue, what kind of things would they do to help him academically? Your Disability Resource Center, they have your child's information, and they really do help your child become a self-advocator. The one thing I really liked about my son's Disability Resource Center at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, was the fact that they once we talked to them and once they realized he's going to do most of this on his own, but we're going to be the backup, they really taught him some of the things that helped him work in the work world. One of the really great accommodations that you can get is preferential class selection, even as a freshman, because my son needed to have morning classes. He does best, when he gets the morning time and then starts to kind of peel off in the afternoon as he gets a little more tired. He got to have selections of his classes before upperclassmen. So he never had to worry about, that class is full and now you're going to have to wait or not be able to take it or have to take something that's an alternate to whatever you were going to choose. Worked out really well because he was able to finish early because of that. Testing at the DRC was always available. Preferential housing. If you have a child that I want to live on campus, they will provide single units, so it's only a one student per housing unit there. The extended time to make up tests is big for students. You may have a medical emergency and miss a week of school. There will be time that will be able to be made up, and of course, possible note takers. The best thing you can do is have a plan with your child before sitting down with college staff. If you're going to have a meeting with the counselor from the Disability Resource Center, have that plan. Know going in what you're going to say. It's essential that you as parents and your child come in as a unified front. That way they understand that they're not dealing with individuals. It's not and I hate that it feels like this, but it feels divide and conquer sometimes, because colleges want to deal with your child as an adult. And of course, we still see our children as our children. Mine's 25 now. He will never be more than about 14 in my eyes, probably. So it's one of those things where it doesn't matter how old you are, you're still my kid. And when you're dealing with college staff, they really just see your kid as an adult. And having that plan ahead of time really is an effective way to let the college staff know, here's kind of where our plan is and how can you help us get there. Okay, Ashley, I think that was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And next, we're going to hand it over to Rebecca Wang, who is going to go ahead and talk about emotionally coping with educational transitions. It's all yours, Becky.
There you go. Thank you, and welcome to our presentation this afternoon. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Chris started our presentation by telling you about some of the academic types of things and things to kind of look for within the school setting. And I'm going to talk to you about how to help your child emotionally cope with those educational transitions, whether it's from middle school to high school to college. What are some things that you as a parent or caregiver can do to help assist with those things? And how do you know if your child is emotionally ready for, let's say, a transition from high school to college? So how can we as parents emotionally prepare a child living with PI for educational transitions? So as a therapist, I have had the good fortune of working with, I did some college counseling for a long time, working with students from a variety of backgrounds. And also I have a son in this age range who lives with PI. And so he will be a senior in high school this year. So, not only are these things that I help youth in college with and their parents, but also I'm living it through my own family situation as well. So what can we do? First and foremost, communication. Communication is key, and that communication starts long before it's time to go to college or to make a transition. And so more communication is usually the best rather than none or very little. And it's so important to talk about your youth's fears, worries, excitements, and expectations, and be able to really listen as they speak about, what kinds of things are they really looking forward to? What things are they really nervous about? What do they think they might need your help with? And so part of that process is teaching your child to advocate for themselves. Chris touched on that a bit. Of course, you are probably their best advocate, but as they're navigating some of these challenges from even middle school to high school or high school to college, there will be times when they really need to be able to advocate. So, being able to have that open communication with them about what they're feeling and what they're hoping for and how you might be able to assist them. The next area to look at is trying to help with some balance, allowing your child to be able to make some choices where it's appropriate. This might look like, are you gonna choose to go out with your friends today, knowing that over the past year, especially, that I don't know, going to a movie theater with your friends probably isn't the best idea if you have PI. And so that was a choice that we sort of let him have. Do you think that's a good plan or do you not? And so he kind of came up with, no, probably not a good plan for him personally. And so letting him have that choice, he actually made a good one. And in the times where perhaps your child is maybe wanting to make a choice that you wouldn't agree with, within reason, allow them to make some mistakes. As a parent, that is incredibly difficult to, especially if you think, gosh, that is such a bad choice. Within reason, allow for those mistakes, because mistakes are how we learn best sometimes. And so, as parents, it's important to resist the urge to hover or be what they sometimes call the helicopter parent. And so it's so important. There's a fine line as a parent between being a support and encouraging and helping, and sometimes over functioning. And so it's really tough, but trying to strike that balance. Family relationships are another thing to talk about and to reflect upon before those transitions are made. So the dynamics of the family can and do change throughout these transitions. So for example, I have an older son and he is going to be a junior in college this next year. So he's been in college a few years now, but we knew that it was going to be difficult when he left our household, but goodness, we hadn't really prepared for how much it would impact the dynamics. And so, being a single mom, and I have two boys, my younger son, the one with PI, when his older brother left, we were like, what do we do now? We kind of just sat there and looked at each other sometimes everything was different. And we hadn't prepared for even just little routine kinds of things that the three of us had done together. And so, preparing that those things might look different. As parents, sometimes it could be that empty nest sort of, concept that we might experience. And so we've put all this effort and time and energy caring for our child with PI. That takes so much. And not that ever stops, but your relationship with them begins to look different. And it may not be the same, and that's okay. It's just hard sometimes to get through. The other thing about family relationships I might mention is the siblings. As I said, siblings have the longest life relationship with our youth who are living with PI. Siblings are just the folks that are going to have the longest life relationships with one another. And so they are absolutely impacted by someone in the household leaving or going to college or even going to high school. And so sometimes I think the siblings get left behind unintentionally, or we forget that, they're coping with a lot of change too. And that brings us to coping. So coping is, how do we deal with some of those situations that might come up? And so it's better to prepare for those things beforehand as best you can and have a plan and help your child determine, what are some things that they could do when they hit road bumps or speed bumps in the road, because that's going to happen. That's a normal part of any kind of transition. They might have challenging classes, even the really, really awesome students in high school that maybe never cracked a book and got a 4.0. A lot of times those students even struggle because college is a lot different. It might be, maybe they have some medical complications during their semester, and now they have to navigate, how do I contact my professors, and what if a professor doesn't want to work with me? What kind of recourse might I have with that? The stress that comes with, I have to miss class for a week or two because I'm sick or I'm in the hospital. And how do I manage the stress of, worrying about all of the things? If your child does have a roommate, what happens if that relationship may not work out so well? That's always a possibility. So how do we cope with those kinds of things? What happens if, or maybe your child has mental health issues that they deal with. And so what happens if their mental health takes a turn for the worse, or they start to really struggle? So these are kinds of things to be thinking about and working through before these transitions happen. And one of the best strategies to work through those things is even to try to role play, or to come up with some scenarios with your child about, what would you do if, and give them a chance to kind of work through that on their own. And then you might offer some suggestions as well. Peer relationships is the next part that we're going to look at. And thinking about, talking about how those relationships with their friends may start to look a lot different. Some of those friendships are retained going to college, and many others sort of drift apart, as and that can be really difficult. When my older son was going to college, being the extreme introvert that my older son is, I really worried about him living on campus, and would he make friends, and how would he be connected? And I really worried that he might be so introverted, he would stay in his room all the time. So much to my surprise, about a week and a half into his first semester, he said, "Mom, all those snacks that you got me to bring to school?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, I'm going to need you to come down and bring me a whole lot more. And I was like, "My goodness, Nick, where did all those snacks go?" And he was like, "I had this great idea, Mom. I made a sign and I put it on the door that said, like, stop in if you want snacks, so that we can kind of get to know each other." And so lo and behold, lots of people through his residence hall, as they would walk past, they'd be like, "Hey, snacks." And so they'd knock on the door. And it was a great way for my super introverted son to make some connections. So as you can imagine, I happily filled up his snack supply anytime he wanted. And such a simple thing really helped him make some of those connections. This is an area that a lot of college students struggle with, especially students in the PI realm. It's difficult sometimes to forge those relationships with other peers who might understand a little bit about what they're going through. So, encourage your students to get involved where they can. There are lots of clubs and sports and different kinds of things. There's something for everyone on a college campus that they might get involved with. And that is a great way to make some connections. Or if all else fails, get a whole bunch of snacks. Hopefulness is another part. Help your young person feel empowered. This is such a scary and exciting time, these transitions. And so help them to feel empowered by teaching them skills. I know my sons laughed at me when I kind of had like a little panic attack before my first son went to college. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, have I taught you to do laundry? Do you know where the soap goes? Do you know how to I don't know, like reconcile your banking account," that kind of stuff. And so, by teaching them skills, whether it's things like managing a bank account or doing their own laundry or cooking something other than ramen noodles, or helping them with some organizational habits or study skills, once they get some proficiency there, they're going to feel even more hopeful, like, yeah, I can totally do this. And also self-care falls under this category. When they need a break, when they need some downtime, college is stressful. These transitions are stressful. Living with PI is stressful. Putting their self-care at the forefront. And what does that even mean? Helping them to understand that sometimes that means I need to take a break. And if I need to rest, I need to listen to my body and rest. And sometimes if it's just time for me to go home because I need a hug from my family, then that's what I need to do. If I'm a person who just likes to veg out and play video games a little bit, and that's my way to decompress, maybe I need to take a little time to do that. So self-care is really important. And finally, seek help when needed. I think there's so much strength and courage in being able to ask for help, whether it's for you as the parent navigating these transitions or for your young person. On college campuses and even in high schools, there are tons of resources and support. Licensed clinicians, therapists can help. There's also, medical services and psychiatric services. So, always encourage them to seek help when needed. So how do I know that my child is emotionally ready for independence or college? Here are some things to kind of think about as you're trying to assess, is my child ready? Research shows that emotional readiness is the best predictor of whether a student will adjust successfully to college life. So how do I know, are they ready emotionally for this? One of the things you might look at is, how have they handled high school? Do they arrive on time? Are they able to get themselves there? Are they doing their assignments with not a whole lot of intervention from you? Are they steering clear of trouble or toxic friends? And so, how do they navigate just those different aspects of high school? Of course, they need some guidance from time to time, but many of these things, they should be able to do relatively on their own. How do they handle difficult feelings and situations? So when problems arise in your teen's life, how do they handle that? Do they shut down and not talk about it, and they kind of build up and then they blow up? Or are they really a problem solver? Do they look for ways to navigate those issues? Are they asking others for help and support? Do they advocate for themselves? And then how does your teen let off steam? Is it in healthy or unhealthy ways? What strategies do they use? Another thing you could look at is, how well can your teen assess risk and stay safe? So some of those things, and this might refer to something I mentioned earlier about those role plays or walking through what if scenarios, skills like about never going to parties alone, always operating on the buddy system at nighttime, limiting or not drinking at all, or not accepting drinks from others, just overall safety, locking their residence hall door when they leave, that kind of stuff. Can they, if you gave them a scenario, would they be able to say, yeah, that probably isn't a good idea? Or if I did that thing, I would put these safety measures in place. Those are good things to look at. Can they take care of themselves? College is a fairly independent process, and things like, can they cook something? Can they clean their room a little bit? Although my son was always like, Mom, can you clean my bathroom when you come? So he was capable, but I think he left it for me sometimes. Can they do their laundry? How do they do with taking their medication? This is a really big one. When our students transition from high school to college and they're not with us all the time, here I can look and see, as my son's taking his infusions at college, I can ask, but I don't really know. And then finally, are they able to make and get to their appointments and things like that on time? Can they do those things? The other thing I'll leave you with is, if you go to the next slide, this is a transition checklist, and there will be a link to this in the handouts that you'll get later. This is just a small excerpt, and it's a little hard to read on the screen, but this college checklist assesses various areas of readiness for your child. So you can go through the checklist and be able to prepare ahead of time. Things like, do they know the names of their medicine? Can they explain their condition? Did they wear a medical alert bracelet? Did they know when to take their medication and how? Things like that. So in the interest of time, because we're running short, I did include a link, like I said, in your material that you will get later, that you can find the entire checklist. And it's a great one to be able to walk through as you are making your preparations. So just very briefly, what can you do if your child struggles? Be loving and supportive. Listen. Listening is the most important thing. Oftentimes our kiddos don't want us to solve the problem. They want us to understand how they're feeling. Encourage them to get involved where they can, to get to know a teacher or professor. Connect with other parents of students who understand what you're going through as a parent. Thinking outside of the box for new ideas, creative ideas. Give them some space to try things on their own. That's so hard as a parent, but sometimes they will surprise us in the best possible ways. And then again, don't be afraid to seek professional help, either your student or for yourself if need be. And then finally, there are just some resources. Chris covered a bunch of these as well. Some resources like use the teachers, administrators, the offices like Student Disability Services for those accommodations that Chris talked about. Colleges and universities have licensed therapists that can help your students, and they're a great resource. The IDF, of course, has many resources that can help, and your peer support, connecting with other parents is critical during these times. It's so important to have that. And then finally, that's where the checklist can be found that we were just talking about.
Thank you so much, Becky, and thank you, Chris. At this time, we're going to go ahead and start our Q&A. We do have about 10 minutes worth of questions, so we're really excited. Chris, this question is for you. A parent would like to know should a student consider mentioning their PI in college entrance essays?
I think the sooner your child can own the fact that they have it, they absolutely should let people know. And so the only time my son ever really kept his kind of under wraps is in the first 90 days of his first job. It's, he didn't want to have anything come up where his employer may say, well, this future long-term employee may end up having a sick leave issue, and then he could be released for anything he might have done. But he was usually really super open with, I have a PI. From every relationship he had, it's how he managed to really have success with many of his teachers in high school and college. And it was really how he determined what woman to eventually marry, because she was the one that accepted the fact that you have it, and she wanted to learn what it meant for him and her to actually go through it together. So I would encourage, when your child's comfortable and then they have that process where they can feel like they own it, absolutely they should share at any moment with anyone that they feel is a trusted person in their lives.
Thank you. Becky, this next question is for you. My son is becoming very, very isolated. And when I encourage him to go to IDF teen events, he doesn't really like to. Do you have any tips on how I can encourage him to be less isolated?
Oh, that's a great question. My son was very similar to that at times. And, I wonder, sometimes the idea of being with a big group and a lot of people for some young people can be kind of scary and intimidating. So maybe, I know that through the IDF, if your son wants to get connected, or maybe you could suggest a one-on-one kind of a thing. I know for various times my son was able to get connected with another youth just one-on-one, and they logged on through the IDF, one of their functions, and they just kind of talked and chatted together. And then they kind of made a connection and exchanged numbers, and they just sort of chatted, and then they ended up playing video games together and becoming friends. And so, I would encourage you to look for opportunities through even the IDF as a starting place to say, are there any like youth peer support? There are smaller groups through the IDF as well, like some of those teen groups, even online. I've been a part of some of those events, and your youth could even turn their camera off and like just type in the chat or just listen the first time they attend. And they can kind of see those people that are on the teen council and other teen participants are so cool. Like, they're the most amazing youth, and so maybe just encourage them to look from afar for a little bit of time, and then maybe they'll want to dive in.
I have the pleasure of working with our IDF teams, and I can say they are a pretty cool bunch. This is going to be our last question, and it kind of goes to both Chris and Becky. You mentioned a little bit about the tips coping, with your kids having to become their own advocate. Becky, we can shed some light, but Chris, how did you cope with your kid going to college and you're not the one that your teacher goes to for questions. They have to learn to advocate for themselves. How was that?
It's difficult at best, especially when you're at college and you're sitting in a meeting and you know that your role there is to kind of have a muzzle, and that your child has to be the one talking. When you drive out of the parking lot and you start heading down the road, you realize pretty quickly that your preparation needed to be happening when they're a middle schooler and in elementary school. And so while you'll have trepidation, if you're already starting to work on this, if you have a middle schooler, if you have a high schooler, and you're starting to think, man, what's it going to look like? My wife and I, we spent so much time just preparing for that moment, going, he can do this. He's strong. He's independent. He knows when to take his meds. And I mean, Ashley said it earlier. We listen to our son a lot. I put it in the chat. My son would walk into my room at 1:00, usually on a Wednesday night, going real talk. And I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be 4 a.m. before I go to bed. And, but even as an adult, when there was a situation, he calls up now and goes, what do you think? And so even when you're not there, before they're making decisions, they're gonna call you up and go, what do you think? What should I do? And then they're gonna have the power to make those kinds of decisions. But it is pretty scary the first time you leave your kid to live on their own. And my kid was living in an apartment by himself at 19 years old. And I'm like, he's a smart kid. He's a good kid. He's not going to do anything dumb. We got this. But there was so much work that went into it before we got there.
I would just echo what Chris said. And, in my work over the years with youth living with PI, they're remarkable. They're absolutely remarkable. And, I think it's important to remember they have overcome some pretty unfathomable adversities in their life to get to where they are. And they'll surprise you in some of the best possible ways if we allow them that opportunity to just fly. And as parents, that's so difficult. And sometimes we just have to kind of let it play out and see, and always be that safe and soft landing place should they need us. But allow them to make their mistakes and to learn and to grow from them. That's really how we all do that process. And so, just remember that they're remarkable and they will surprise you in some of the best ways if you let them. And then for parents, of course, reach out for support. It's a hard transition. And especially if you're a parent of someone you love with PI, it's even harder. And so there are lots of people like myself and Chris and probably many others who would be more than happy to talk to you and help with some support too.
Thank you so much, Chris and Becky. I know that we only have about 2 minutes left, but one of the things that I did want to ask you came from our parents. Should you limit your kids from careers? If they say they want a doctor, should you tell them that they can't do that? Chris, I see you shaking your head. If you can answer that.
Oh, you should never limit your kid. There was a time in our lives where we thought, we can have him live in a bubble, or we can have him do anything in the world, as long as we teach him, here's the safe way to do it. I mean, my kid was a high school wrestler. I mean, good word. It's got to be one of the dirtiest close contact sports you can ever participate in. And yet, he loved it. It was part of who he was. And now he's a world traveler. I mean, he's traveled around the globe multiple times as an individual with PI. And I would never think of having limited my child to see and do the things that he's done in his life, or the things that he's going to do in the world. He works in healthcare himself. I think if you set limits, you're going to set limits that are going to be hard to overcome. They're always going to be that thought of, they'll start to think they can't. And I don't think any parent ever wants to put those limits on their own child. So we did a lot of education up front. Think about what you would have to do before you do this. Tell us your plan. If you're going to do this, tell us what you have to do in order for this to be safe. And now I don't have to do that anymore, because he's got a wife who does the same thing to him. So, because we taught her how to do it. But No, don't set limits. Let your kids go and experience the world and everything it has for them. The therapy that's being done nowadays is life changing, and I can't encourage all of you enough how important the IDF is. I said it in the chat, but it changed our lives. I believe that it saved my marriage to my wife, because we found a place where we could talk to people without having to talk to each other in a certain way, because I have a different experience than my wife does. My wife has a different experience than I do. And those didn't match up, and we couldn't have those conversations, but we found people we could through the IDF. And it really changed who we were as parents, who we were in our relationship as husband and wife. So I encourage you, get connected, have your children connect. My kid didn't want to go to Teen Escape either, and then became a teen council member when he was in that age range. So once they're there, they realize, oh, these are my people. So you just encourage as much as you can for them to do everything and anything that they dream up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Becky, for being here today. We certainly hope that you enjoyed this session. We encourage you to please attend our peer connection sessions. I believe after this, we will have some for parents, so please do utilize those. They are there for you. Thank you again for being here, and we will see you soon. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.